And today, we're diving into something, well, incredibly fundamental. It's the science of interpersonal attraction and rejection,
Yeah, why we like some people. Why maybe they don't like us back sometimes.
and what happens when those connections get challenged. We're going to explore that deep human need to belong first.
Right. Then we'll dig into the variables, the things that predict who likes whom.
And after that, tackle the tough stuff: social rejection, loneliness.
Before wrapping up with what makes human social connection, well, distinctly human, perhaps.
It's a dive into the real bedrock of our social lives. Should be interesting.
Let's jump right in then. This fundamental drive, this need to belong. Why is it so powerful? The research seems really clear on this.
Oh, it is. It's not just a nice to have. It's presented as a basic human need, deeply rooted in, well, survival and reproduction.
Survival. How so?
We survive and reproduce by relating to others, right?
Yeah.
Forming groups, finding mates. So this desire to form and keep close, lasting bonds, it's a powerful motivator for, like, so much of our behavior.
It pushes us to connect, to commit.
To stay together, yeah, it's fundamental.
So, okay, satisfying this need to belong, what does that actually involve, according to the material you looked at? Is it just, being around people?
Not quite.
Yeah.
The sources point to two really critical ingredients. First, yes, regular social contact. You need that interaction.
Okay.
But just as important is the second piece: needing a stable framework, ongoing relationships where people actually share mutual concern.
So like best friends, partners, maybe a really close-knit group or family.
Exactly. That depth and stability matters. It's not just frequency.
So someone working, say, a toll booth or a telemarketer, they talk to tons of people, right? But that doesn't necessarily scratch the itch.
Probably not, no, because those interactions, they lack that stable mutual concern. They're superficial in that sense. The quality isn't there.
Got it. And the flip side, not belonging, the sources suggest that's actually pretty dangerous.
Yeah, the links are quite stark. Higher risks of disease, both mental and physical health problems, even increased mortality rates.
Wow. So loneliness isn't just feeling sad, it physically takes a toll?
It seems so. Things like sleep quality suffer. Recovery from stress or illness slows down. The material even links it to increases in stuff like drinking or overeating. It affects the body.
But conversely, feeling connected, having that strong network.
It doesn't just buffer against the bad stuff. It can genuinely make life feel more meaningful, more purposeful.
Okay, so belonging is crucial. How do we actually, get people to like us in the first place? The sources mention this term, ingratiation.
Right, ingratiation. It's basically all the things people actively do to try and make others like them. And while it turns out we kind of instinctively know what works,
Like what?
well, the research confirms what you'd probably guess.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to like others who are, attractive, friendly, similar to themselves, and who treat them well. We use those strategies.
And similarity comes up again and again in the material, doesn't it? That birds of a feather flock together idea seems to hold a lot of water scientifically.
It really does. Similarity across all sorts of things: age, background, education, beliefs, interests. It's a really strong predictor of liking.
It's the whole basis for internet dating sites, pretty much. Matching people on shared traits.
Exactly. And there was that wild story in the sources, too. Remember the email romance where they felt incredibly similar?
Oh, yeah. And then they met and discovered they were mother and son.
Yeah, which is, obviously an extreme and very unusual case, but it really highlights just how deep that pull of similarity can run.
It really does. And the matching hypothesis fits here, too. People pairing up based on looks.
Yes, that people tend to pair off with others of similar physical attractiveness. And that applies not just to lovers, but friends too, same sex, opposite sex, across the board.
Why is similarity so powerful, do you think? Is it an evolutionary thing? Safety in the group?
Could be. Sticking with those, like, you might have felt safer, evolutionarily speaking.
Yeah.
Part of your in-group. And, we learn to love the people we grow up with, our family, who are often similar.
Makes sense.
But here's a really interesting twist the research suggests. Matching might actually be driven less by actively seeking out similarity.
And more by?
More by actively rejecting or avoiding people who are dissimilar.
So it's like we filter out the differences more than we seek the similarities.
That's one way to look at it, yeah.
Yeah.
Some studies show that as you learn more about someone, finding dissimilarities can actually make you like them less, which it kind of pushes against the idea that just knowing more is always better.
Interesting. Though the sources do mention that while similarity is key for personal bonds, Sometimes culture values diversity, right, for groups.
Yes, exactly. For larger systems, having different skills and perspectives, complementarity can be more beneficial. So it's not universally similarity above all.
Okay. Beyond similarity, what about social rewards? Liking people who make us feel good.
That's reinforcement theory, basically.
Mhm.
We like things that are rewarding, and that includes people. So doing favors, buying dinner, giving gifts,
Compliments.
compliments, absolutely. These things make the other person feel good, and that promotes liking.
Like that story about Joe Girard, the car salesman, sending postcards just saying, I like you.
Exactly. He understood that making people feel liked was just as important, maybe more important, than the price of the car. It's a perfect example of social rewards in action.
And closely related is reciprocity, right? Liking
Yeah.
tends to create liking in return.
It's a powerful force. If you find out someone likes you, it's genuinely hard not to feel at least some positive feeling back towards them.
Which is why trustworthiness is so valued. It implies they'll return your positive investment.
Precisely. You trust they'll reciprocate. And this isn't just about words. The material mentions nonverbal mimicry, too.
Oh, yeah, like subconsciously copying someone's posture, or like if they touch their face, you do too.
Exactly. And that often increases liking, even if no one is consciously aware it's happening. Maybe even starts with babies mimicking their parents.
And the flip side, if you don't have romantic feelings for someone who likes you, that reciprocity thing can make it really awkward or guilt-inducing to reject them.
It really can. It goes against that deep-seated impulse. And this whole principle of reciprocity, it's fundamental for building the kind of complex social networks that human culture depends on. Supports that cultural animal perspective.
Okay, so similarity, rewards, reciprocity. What about deeper things like moral character, especially for, long-term relationships?
That's crucial, according to the sources. Beyond just being warm or friendly, things like honesty, trustworthiness, fairness, courage, these moral traits are vital for stable, lasting bonds.
So first impressions might be about warmth, but long-term judgment leans more on morality.
It seems so.
Hmm.
Especially when considering someone for a serious relationship, people weigh moral character very heavily.
And isn't there that finding that kind of bucks the similarity trend here about self-control?
Yes, that's fascinating. Even people who score low on self-control themselves tend to prefer partners with high self-control.
So they don't want someone similar in that specific trait.
Apparently not. It really underscores how important certain traits related to reliability and, well, morality are for partnership. It suggests we're judging character not just for past actions, but for future relationship security.
Got it. Another factor mentioned is propinquity
Hmm.
and mere exposure, basically just being around someone a lot.
Yeah, the propinquity effect. Simple physical closeness. Friendships often spark just because people live near each other or work together.
And mere exposure builds on that.
Right. We tend to develop more positive feelings towards things, including people, just by being exposed to them repeatedly. As long as the first impression wasn't negative, familiarity breeds liking.
So even sharing tough experiences like combat veterans bonding, that shared familiarity can create connection.
Absolutely, that intense shared experience fosters familiarity and liking. But there's a warning here too, the social allergy effect.
Social allergy, what's that?
It means that a partner's annoying little habits, they can actually become more irritating over time with repeated exposure. Familiarity can make bad things feel worse, not better.
Oh, I can definitely see that happening. Okay, let's talk about the big one. Physical attractiveness. The sources are pretty blunt here. Looks matter.
They really do. All else being equal, attractive people are preferred.
Yeah.
And often, even when all else isn't equal, attractiveness still carries significant weight.
The what is beautiful is good effect. We just assume attractive people have other good qualities.
Yeah, we tend to project positive traits onto them like happiness, popularity, intelligence, success. Interestingly, maybe not always honesty, but lots of other good stuff. And which traits get linked can vary a bit by culture.
And this isn't just a feeling, right? The research backs it up.
Consistently. Studies show attractive kids are more popular, liked better by teachers. Even tiny babies prefer looking at attractive faces over unattractive ones.
Wow, even babies.
Yep. And in adult life, attractive people tend to do better in job interviews. They might even get more help in an emergency.
And that classic dating study, the one where attractiveness trumped everything else.
That was a real eye-opener for researchers. They expected things like similarity or reciprocity to predict how much people enjoyed a blind date.
Mhm.
But nope. The single strongest predictor was how physically attractive their partner was.
So, okay, what actually makes someone attractive, according to this material?
A few key things stand out. Cues of youth and health are big, like clear skin, general vitality. And interestingly, no known culture seems to prefer older-looking women over younger-looking ones in terms of beauty standards.
And symmetry, that comes up too.
Yes, facial and bodily symmetry. When both sides match well, it's often seen, maybe unconsciously, as a signal of good health and genetic fitness.
Like those studies where they digitally averaged faces or made them perfectly symmetrical.
Exactly. Those averaged or symmetrical faces are consistently rated as more attractive. And remember the t-shirt smell studies.
Where women preferred the smell of more symmetrical men.
Especially when fertile, yes, suggests it's a deep biological signal. Typicality, or averageness, also plays a role. Faces closer to the population average tend to be seen as more attractive than highly unusual ones.
Of course, beauty standards change over time too, don't they? Like body type preferences or maybe the influence of celebrities.
Absolutely, culture shifts things.
Yeah.
And the sources had that specific section on money matters.
Right, saying that while physical things like waist-to-hip ratio matter, money can be more important, especially for women looking at long-term partners.
Exactly. And for men, height is valued, but again, money can compensate significantly. One study suggested a shorter man needed way more income to get as many date requests as a taller guy. Even clothes matter, signaling status.
And finally, touching on attraction, online dating. It's changed everything. What are the pros and cons mentioned?
Well, the big pro is obviously the huge pool of potential partners, way bigger than your immediate social circle, and you can kind of screen people beforehand via messages.
But the downsides.
Profiles aren't always truthful. Height, weight, age often get fudged. Plus, just chatting online isn't the same as meeting face-to-face. Those algorithms aren't magic love formulas. And maybe paradoxically, having too much choice might mean people invest less effort in any one person.
Okay, that covers attraction pretty well. But the flip side, rejection, is just brutal. The sources talk about ostracism.
Ostracism, yeah. Being excluded, rejected, ignored. The word itself comes from ancient Greece. They used pottery shards, ostraka, to vote someone into exile.
Wow. And modern examples.
It can be subtle, like the silent treatment, or more formal, like military shunning, or even large-scale, like the international ostracism used against apartheid South Africa.
And that story about the researcher Kip Williams getting shut out of a simple frisbee game.
Yeah, even that brief exclusion by total strangers felt surprisingly bad to him. It just shows how deep that need for inclusion runs. It's almost primal.
And being ostracized by people you actually care about, or for a long time.
That's described as devastating, really damaging.
Why do people even do it? Why reject others? Sometimes it seems easier to just talk.
The sources suggest it often feels easier than confrontation. It's a less direct way to show disapproval and maybe conserves energy compared to a difficult conversation.
And for kids, rejection often seems based on just being different, doesn't it? Aggression, being withdrawn, looking different.
Yes, exactly. Deviance from the norm in looks, behavior, background, even intelligence can make kids targets. The material suggests this might be a really automatic, deep pattern mirroring that preference for similarity we saw in attraction.
Huh. So the same drive that pulls us to the similar might push us to reject the different.
It's a plausible link, yeah. For adults, deviating from group norms is a huge trigger for rejection. Groups often feel threatened by nonconformists.
Especially insiders who deviate.
Right, because an insider deviating feels like a bigger threat to group unity than an outsider doing the same thing. Even poor performance is often judged more harshly if it's someone from within the group.
Breaking the rules is a big one.
Definitely. It threatens the group's success. So the threat of being kicked out, of rejection, is a really powerful force pushing people toward conformity and good behavior. It helps avoid that bad apple effect. In families, rejection often comes down to breaking fundamental rules like loyalty or trust.
Okay, let's get into the internal experience. What does rejection feel like? The sources say it's overwhelmingly negative.
Oh, absolutely. The long-term effects listed are serious. Pain, illness, depression, higher risk of suicidal thoughts, eating disorders, feelings of helplessness, life feeling meaningless, low self-esteem. It's rough.
And it can create a cycle. Rejection sensitivity.
Yeah, if you experience rejection repeatedly, you might start expecting it, become hyper-aware of potential slights, and maybe even act in ways that push people away, unfortunately reinforcing the pattern.
That phrase, "you hurt my feelings." The sources say it's often less about intent and more about feeling like the other person doesn't care enough about the relationship.
Exactly. Forgetting a birthday might not be intended to hurt, but it sends a signal that the relationship isn't valued enough, and that's what hurts. The level of hurt depends on how much you value that connection and how clear the signal is that they don't care as much.
And that initial reaction.
Numbness.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The first response is often feeling nothing, which might be a biological defense mechanism, kind of like the way physical pain can be initially dulled after an injury. And the brain scans showing overlap between social and physical pain.
Right. It suggests social pain is very real neurologically. And incredibly, studies even found that common painkillers, like Tylenol, can actually reduce the feeling of social pain.
Taking a pill for social pain.
Hmm.
Wow. And rejection messes with our thinking too.
It seems to. Temporary cognitive impairment, basically. It makes people temporarily less good at complex thinking. And it really undermines self-regulation.
Making people more impulsive.
Yeah, making poor choices they regret later. That food for thought study is a stark example. Rejected people ate more cookies, poor impulse control, but drank less of a healthy but nasty vinegar drink. A failure to make themselves do something beneficial that requires self-control.
So when acceptance is off the table, the motivation for self-control drops.
It seems that way. The payoff for being conscientious isn't there, so maybe people revert to more selfish or immediate impulses.
What about behavior? How does rejection make people act? Aggression comes up a lot.
Sadly, yes.
Repeated rejection is strongly correlated with aggression, including some really tragic cases of school violence mentioned in the sources, both in the U.S. and internationally, like the Mourne Harmsy case in South Africa. A common theme is feeling excluded.
Of course, aggression can also cause rejection, right? It's a two-way street.
Absolutely, it can become a vicious cycle.
But it doesn't always lead to aggression. Can it sometimes motivate people to find new connections?
It can. Sometimes rejection makes people more attuned to social cues, more careful as they look for new friends, and focusing on existing positive relationships, like literally looking at photos of loved ones, can help buffer the pain.
And creativity. Is there a link there?
It's mixed. Some research hints rejection might boost creativity, especially for people who already value being different. But a lot of other research points the other way. Decreased intelligent thought, more skepticism towards new people, less helping behavior, more impulsivity.
So the positive anecdote from the Conroy novel, where rejection leads to positive action, that's maybe more the exception than the rule in the psychological findings. The general trend in the research leans towards the more negative consequences, unfortunately, even though inspiring stories exist.
But there are glimmers of hope, especially if people see a chance for acceptance later.
That seems key. If rejected people feel there's a real possibility of being accepted again, either back into the group or by a new one, their behavior can become more positive, more cooperative, conforming, less aggressive, maybe using mimicry to fit in.
Okay, moving from active rejection to that related state, loneliness. How do the sources define that?
Loneliness isn't just being alone. It's the painful feeling of wanting more human connection, or maybe deeper connection, than you currently have. The key is the gap between what you want and what you have.
So you can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely.
Absolutely. Lonely people don't necessarily spend less time with others. The issue is often the lack of sufficient or satisfying contact. Quality, not just quantity.
Do lonely people differ much from non-lonely people in other ways?
Not necessarily in things like intelligence or attractiveness, or even total interaction time. One difference noted is that lonely people might be poorer at accurately reading others' emotions, which could make social interactions harder.
So it comes back to that lack of close, satisfying relationships.
Primarily, yes. That seems to be the root. Things like being physically distant from home or experiencing social distance due to big cultural or historical shifts, like generational gaps mentioned, can also contribute.
Are there ways people cope or find substitutes for that connection?
The sources mention a few. Connecting with groups or organizations can help, maybe more so for men, according to one note. Some women find forming parasocial relationships with celebrities or TV characters can lessen loneliness.
And pets, or even inanimate objects.
Yes, companion animals are a huge source of connection for many. And even inanimate objects like Wilson the volleyball in Castaway can serve as a stand-in, which just shows how powerful that underlying need for connection really is.
And loneliness, like rejection, has physical consequences too.
Definitely. The material mentions poor sleep, being chronically tired, slower recovery from illness or stress, more unhealthy behaviors like drinking or overeating, and just generally poor self-care. It impacts the whole system.
Okay, so we've covered this fundamental need, what draws us together, what happens when we're pushed apart or feel alone, what makes this whole picture uniquely human. Lots of animals are social.
That's true. Many patterns needing to belong, liking similar or rewarding individuals, rejecting deviance we see echoes in other social animals.
But humans are different.
Very different in key ways, largely because of culture. Language is maybe the most obvious difference.
Allowing much deeper connection and understanding.
Exactly. Far beyond what animals can achieve.
Hmm.
Also, think about similarity and dissimilarity. For us, it exists on countless cultural levels.
Right.
Politics, sports teams, hobbies, shared values. Animals don't operate on that complex symbolic level.
And getting accepted into a human group is more complicated. The long road to social acceptance.
Right. It requires understanding cultural rules, having social skills, maybe resources, putting in effort. It's not just about basic signals like scent or appearance, the way it might be for animals.
And that point about needing to be special or unique, that seems counter to the similarity thing.
It does, doesn't it? But the idea is, while similarity helps with basic bonding, human cultures also value unique skills and contributions. Being indispensable because you have a special talent offers another route to acceptance, one that's less about blending in and more about standing out in a valuable way. That's quite human.
And finally, how we formalize relationships.
Yes. Marriage, divorce laws, contracts. We create formal structures with legal and social recognition around our bonds. That governs behavior within relationships, like child support and how they end. That level of formalized structure is uniquely human.
So this deep dive really paints a picture of connection as just fundamental. It shapes who we like, how we react when it goes wrong.
Absolutely. From that basic, almost primal need to belong, through all those factors of attraction, similarity, rewards, reciprocity, morality, even just being nearby or looking a certain way.
All the way to the genuine pain of rejection and loneliness and how that impacts our thoughts and actions. It's the whole machinery of our social world laid bare, really.
And while we see some of these patterns in other animals, the human story is just so much richer, so much more complex because of culture, language, all the ways we can be similar or different, and this dual drive to fit in and be special.
So here's something to think about. If this need to belong is so deep and rejection hurts so much physically, mentally, how much of our everyday behavior, maybe stuff we don't even notice, is driven by wanting acceptance and fearing exclusion?
And how does that underlying current shape everything else? The communities we build, the cultures we participate in, it's definitely something to mull over.
Food for thought until our next deep dive.